So my interview today, my guest today is DeMaurice Smith. He is the former executive director of the NFLPA. And D, before I get to you, I've got a quick little sort of segue here, an explanation. As some of you know, I've been a political journalist for most of my professional life. For a couple of years, I was the founding managing editor of something that is known today as the Sports Business Journal. Back then, it was called the Sports Business Daily. Founded in 1994 in the middle of all this labor strife. And I remember back then, one of the most important books I read to sort of ground me in understanding the business of sports was a book called Lords of the Realm. Yeah. It was by John Helyar. He a Wall Street Journal reporter, and it was just incredible history of the business of baseball, both in the early days of baseball as well as in the near term. And I always lamented that there wasn't something about the business of the NFL that had that same sort of depth and information to it until I read your book, D, Turf Wars. It's certainly a tough book. It is certainly one that you don't pull any punches. But I also think, my son, who's going to be majoring in sports management in college right now. I think this is a book that every sports management and sports marketing professor should assign it as reading. I mean, there's personality stuff in here, and that happens in any book. But to explain how the business of the NFL works is something we don't have a clear picture into, and that to me is this, for me as a fan and a reporter, is the big service I got out of this book. I mean, I assume you noted that. I think you could say Mark Leibovich's book on the NFL sort of got to it a little bit, but nothing with sort of this depth and breadth on the business side. And certainly the NFL would argue a one-sided portrayal, fair, on that front. But you certainly are an insider who is at least helping us shine a light on what goes on inside these boardrooms.
Well, first of all, it's an honor for you to compare me with Helyar's book. I read it a while back as well. I believe that book and of course Marvin Miller's book, Whole New Ballgame. I wanted to write a book about football that was like those two books, and I think the only way that you can do it is certainly to do it in a way that lends yourself to the criticism that it's a one-sided story. But I never tried to present anything else other than this is my story, my journey, dealing with 32 billionaires who run the business of football.
So let me just start with the basics here. Why this book? Why did you think it was necessary to tell the story?
I think so much of the business of sport, especially the business of football, is covered in a way where people are sometimes doing their best to keep their access. I think that's sports journalism in general, by the way. It's a huge challenge. I always say, I think it's harder sometimes being a sports journalist than a political journalist because I have Freedom of Information Act requests that a government has to at least, I don't know if this government will, but at least has to attempt to abide by. There's no such thing in a private enterprise. The NFL, a team can tell me to pound sand. Well, and as you know, they often do.
Right.
So at the end of the day, I wanted to write it for two reasons. One, you talked about Helyar's book in 1994. Remember, at the exact same time, 1993 was when the National Football League achieved free agency through the Reggie White, Freeman McNeil case. And I think, one, I wanted to write it because this is my story of dealing with 31 billionaires. But the other one is, I started off the book with this frame of mind that the National Football League was a microcosm of the way the country is being run. Yeah. And I came away with this concern that the country is, in a lot of ways, being run the way the NFL is run. And this idea that there are a group of well-meaning, loving, grandfatherly billionaires who are simply out there to look after your and my best interest. And this somehow knee-jerk or almost curated belief that these oligarchs are the best people to run our democracy and to control the levers of the press, healthcare, our access to information, I find that troubling. And so it was a good opportunity for me to sit down and tell my story, but also shed a light on the exact way that these guys think and operate. Because at times it is just utterly petty.
So it was interesting when I remember when you were picked, and it was a surprise because you weren't a former player.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's funny, Gene Upshaw's legacy really does depend on where you sit.
Yep.
I looked at it through the prism of all the other sports unions and thought, why is the NFL sports union so weak?
Yeah.
That's all I ever thought about for my entire sort of fandom. Now, if you look at Upshaw's time sort of, and you have blinders on, and you don't see how the other leagues manage their owners and how the other players associations worked, you would say, well, look, he incrementally got a lot done, right? Yep. They did finally get free agency. They did finally get some, better revenue sharing and things like that. But that's, and so to me, your hiring felt like this was the player saying, boy, enough is enough.
Yeah.
We need somebody who, it doesn't matter. In some ways, it might be better if they didn't, quote, wear the shield. That was the mindset of the players at that time. And I think that sounds like you were skeptical you were going to get hired because you assumed that was the biggest problem you faced. And in fact, it turned out that was the best feature.
I think that's right. I think to a certain extent, the players back in 2009 were looking for, as we would say, if you love the Godfather reference, a wartime consigliere.
Yeah.
But as true as I think that is, I think there's two caveats or maybe three caveats that are incredibly important. One, first, those guys woke up one day and Gene Upshaw, who had run the union for as long as many of them were alive, was dead.
Yeah.
And I think that made that group of Drew Brees, Brian Dawkins, Mike Vrabel, Jeff Saturday, Dominique Foxworth, Kevin Mawai, I think that made those guys certainly older from a mature standpoint than many of the leaders that I had to work with later. Number two, Chuck, we were headed into a war. And I think the players made a decision that they wanted somebody from the outside who understood war and maybe someone who didn't necessarily care about relationships. But the last thing I will say is this, Gene went through 3 strikes, 2 as a player and 1 as the executive director. And I can't, from an empathetic standpoint, I can't sit here and second guess a guy who went through 3 strikes where the players voted to go on strike. Only for those players to then cross the picket line and have that strike fail. And then the kicker, he has to pick up the phone and call Paul Tagliabue and beg to come back to work.
Yeah, after Joe Montana basically pulled the rug out from under him.
And so if you're the executive director of,
and we're going back, this is 87, correct?
This is 80. This is 80. Well, 87. Back one more iterate, 82, 87, 91.
82, right. 82, 87, 91, right.
So
Scabs were in 87.
Correct.
82 was strike shortened season.
Correct. So, from where Gene sat, and I think that he was both a legend of a man in reality and in all ways. This might be a person who understood the players better than the players understood themselves.
Yeah.
And realized that his only path was incremental wins.
Yep.
And I guess the last thing I would say is I came into the job with, a different set of, I sound like a Liam Neeson movie, with a different set of skills.
You're a litigator. You take on big corporations, but you're also at a big law firm and all that stuff, right? That's a different skill set. I'm curious, the longer you went, the more did your admiration grow for Upshaw?
100%.
Yeah.
I think that Gene was one of the best labor leaders in history. I think that when you look at the 20 years of litigation from 1971 to 1993 to get free agency, I mean, I did 15 years. It felt like 500 years. But, and also, I guess I would say this. I came into the job in 2009. Gene played under a regime of no free agency.
Mm-hmm.
And we think about those Raiders dynasties. We think about the Steelers dynasty. We think about the Dallas Cowboy dynasty. I mean, Chuck, remember, those teams were dynasties because nobody could leave.
Yeah.
I mean, so at the end of the day, I look at a guy who was stuck in a system that was, I can argue, far more of a plantation system than it is now. Mm-hmm. And a person who was economically stuck in a system that hamstrung the union in ways that I couldn't imagine. And we're also talking about a guy who went through the quarterbacks club controversy, if you remember, when the National Football League went around the country and actually gave quarterbacks money to pull themselves out of the group licensing right to cripple the union. So, I had a tough run.
Yeah.
But, I mean,
he dealt with a lot, right? He was trying to build. I want you to tell the story, because this was shocking to me, of how the NFL tried to stop your hiring. And by essentially hiring the law firm you were still working at the time for other work. Because it's Tommy Boggs, that you were a legendary Washington guy. Yeah. Tommy Boggs, the son of Hale Boggs. This is Cokie Roberts' brother, the late Cokie Roberts. You had her mother served in Congress after Hale Boggs' plane crashed in Alaska. Her mother was the ambassador to the Vatican. Anyway, a legendary family of sort of Washington power brokers. First of all, I didn't know the story about the invention that basically Hale Boggs agreeing to the AFL NFL merger allowed the New Orleans Saints to be born. That's like a good congressman. He did old fashioned horse trading, which is, you want my support from this? Go put a team in New Orleans.
Look, 100%. And Tom, as the only thing I can add to that is, by far, Tom was probably the most powerful Democratic lobbyist to ever walk the face of the planet, bar none.
For a period of time, no doubt. 80s and 90s, he was the guy.
It finally becomes public that I'm a candidate for the job. I come into the office and everybody knows that Tom smoked cigars and drank scotch. And that was before 9:30 in the morning. And he knocked his secretary.
Breakfast of champions, as they say. Yeah.
Breakfast of champions. Yeah. I get a knock on my door. His assistant comes by. Tom wants to see you right away. And of course, you know that is just not good news. Just not good news at 10 o'clock.
Clearly somebody called him and is pissed off about something, and you're about to find out who it is.
You want to get
mad
Tom,
at me? Yeah.
You want to get Tom around 11:30. You don't want 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, Tom. So I walk into his office, sit down. There's a fog of cigar smoke, and he says, "Hey D, you have to realize that we got a call last night from the NFL, and they want Patton Boggs to be the chief lobbyist for the NFL." And immediately, it made sense to me that, by the way, a clever move.
Right? I was just gonna say, I'm weirdly impressed.
I mean, we give credit to where credit is due. It's a brilliant move because
explain why it's a brilliant move. Yeah,
like it gets me in a trick bag. One, I haven't been elected to the job yet, so the election's in whatever it is in March. I think this was maybe early to mid January. Mm-hmm. So for the league to make it a pitch to hire Patton Boggs, it puts me in a trick bag because either I have to step down from the firm, in which case I don't have a job because hopefully I'm getting elected in March, but who knows? If Patton Boggs keeps the NFL as a client and I stay, I have to pull myself out of running for the job. So it is literally the almost the Sophie's choice of what do you do? And for a lobbying firm the size of Patton Boggs, literally the crown jewel is representing the NFL. I mean, they're probably one of the top 10, 15 clients in the world to represent. So I sit there, I basically swallow, whatever's in my mouth, and I'm trying to remain as calm as possible while Tom.
And by the way, Tommy Boggs, close friends with Tom Benson, the owner of the Saints.
Oh, grew up together.
Right. They're very tied in. So these are personal relationships for him. Anyway, keep going.
Well, I never went to the hunting lodge with Tom because, frankly, I never thought I would make it back. But the flip side is, Tom Benson is his childhood friend, and he says, Tom called me about this offer, and it's a great offer for the firm. So I try not to look absolutely terrified, but of course, terrified. And so I turned to Tom and I said, hey, look, I understand this is an important client for the firm. I'll step down immediately. Tom chomps on the cigar, looks at me, and he says, I know it's a family show. He says, well, I told Tom to go F himself.
There you go. He knew exactly what he... I mean, if anybody knows hardball tactics, it's Tommy Boggs.
I couldn't, first of all, I wouldn't have been qualified for the job without working for Tom Boggs. Mm-hmm. And I certainly wouldn't have been able to steer my way through the minefields of Washington and the National Football League without Tom's guidance. Brilliant. Just a brilliant guy.
But it doesn't work. You get Tom's backing on all of this, and I imagine you being accepted. On one hand, the players voted for you because they accepted the premise that this was going to be a war and you needed somebody. Maybe, you might not understand how they live their lives, but that you understood how a boardroom worked. But how hard was it to connect with the players?
Honestly, Todd, not really. It just wasn't, Chuck, it just wasn't hard. First of all, I only have, I think I only have one shtick, right? Whether I'm standing up in front of a jury or standing up in a boardroom, I try to make sure that no one in the room knows more about the facts or the history or the law, or as Tom would say, how Washington works. Mm-hmm. I tried to make sure that no one understood that better than me, Chuck. And that was my job, to understand it nobody better than me. And second, I'm going to stand in front of you and tell the truth. And I think that the players back then were, they didn't understand at first the significance of the National Football League pulling out of the collective bargaining agreement. Mm-hmm. They really didn't appreciate the significance of the NFL trying to get the federal judge, right, who had overseen the collective bargaining agreement for up until that point, almost 20, 25, maybe 30 years. But you and I know, well, up until present company, right, you and I both know that anytime someone makes a play to try to remove a federal judge, it is literally the last card in the deck. Mm. And at the end, when I told the players, hey, look, this is just what I see them doing. Mm-hmm. We either decide that we're going to be in for a war or we're not. And again, I honestly believe that it had less to do with me and more to do with the quality of the people that I was doing the job with. I mean, when you're standing up in front of the New Orleans Saints and Drew Brees says, this is our guy, or you're in, Boston, New England, and Mike Vrabel and Tom Brady are saying, this is our guy. Yeah. It means a lot. I'm not sure they particularly loved D. Smith. I think that they did love the fact that all I did was try to go 10 toes to the line, tell them the truth. And if a war was going to be the only thing that we had, make the other side pack a lunch.
So I was thinking about this a couple of weeks ago. I knew I was going to be interviewing you, and Rob Manfred was meeting with he's been meeting with players because they have their own, what's going to be, look, it's coming. It's coming. And they have, baseball's problem is they actually don't have the socialism of the NFL, right? They don't share revenue in the same way. Right. The NFL is one of the wealthiest socialist organizations we have in the United States. So
number one, they're number one.
But when Bryce Harper basically was willing to tell Rob Manfred to F off, right? Yeah. I was thinking, would Patrick Mahomes do that?
You know what? I think he would.
Okay.
You know,
To Goodell, yeah.
I think so. I mean, there was a moment, you know, there's so much that's on the cutting room floor of turf wars, but in the ramp up to 2011, you know, I was hitting every team twice during that year, talking to players about the upcoming lockout. It didn't end up in the book, but Roger did his own road tour.
Right.
And I think he only made it to team 6 because I vividly remember him going to Cleveland and running into, I think, Joe Thomas. And the meeting went south. And then I remember that he went to Indianapolis because for some reason he thought that that might be a safe place for him to do a meeting, given, you know, Peyton Manning is a country gentleman, right?
Right. He's going to make everybody feel good. Right.
He ran into Indianapolis, and I'll never forget Jeff Saturday picking up the phone and calling me on my cell phone. You know, kept calling, and I pick up the phone. And he goes, "D, man, I had to get up and walk Roger out of the room. The whole thing went south." So, to your point, do I think players could? Do I think that guys like Patrick Mahomes could? The proof in the pudding is whether they actually will. And I think that's one thing that I have always admired, you know, through Tony Clark, who's a good friend of mine. I got to spend time with Marvin Miller, who I have to credit with being the guy that got my head screwed on straight so quickly. Marvin, I mean, happy to tell the story.
I was just going to say, explain that. Were you ready to go in guns a-blazing?
Well, Marvin, you know, it was shortly after 2009. I called over to the former executive director of the MLB Players Association, just a wonderful man named Mike Weiner, who unfortunately passed away. And I asked Mike, is there any way that he could put me in touch with Marvin Miller? And Marvin had recently lost his wife, took the train to New York. The car drops me off in front of his apartment. I have his book, you know, that's just torn up, and I've read it so many times, and I've got little yellow tabs in it because I just want to ask him so many questions. Walked in, and if you remember Marvin was a really slight man, not, you know. So we walk in, you know, he shuts the door. He he asked me, you know, would I like to have some tea? I cannot stand tea. I just, you're a
coffee guy. I can feel it. You're a Red Bull guy.
Coffee guy. You put sugar in it and then you pour it out. And I said, sure. I had some tea. He sat down. He sits down on the sofa. I sit down in the chair. I took the book next to the chair. And the first thing he says to me is, why on God's earth did you take this job? This might be the dumbest thing I've ever seen anybody do.
Yeah, you were going to be U.S. attorney in D.C. I mean, you know, that's a whole different career path. Not to say that, you know, right. I'm sure that's what he was thinking. You're walking away from that. You're potentially a future attorney general. You're some, you know, what are you doing? Right.
He lit into me for about 15 minutes. It's a union with failed strikes. You think that you're going to be able to talk to the owners as businessmen. They will never respect you for a bunch of reasons. And I don't care about your law background. They don't care about your law background. They're going to eat you alive. This thing went on for 15, 20 minutes. I asked him a couple of questions about, if you were me, what would you think about? And he said, I would think about finding another job. And yes. And then it was so brutal that at the end, I just simply said, hey, Mr. Miller, you know, thank you, you know, for your time. And I picked up the book. I wanted him to sign it. I was afraid to ask.
Wow.
And walked out the door. And I got in the car. I called Mike Weiner back and I said, I had my meeting with Marvin, and literally, you know, he chuckles and said, how did it go? I went, I don't think it went well. And 2 days later, I got a call back from Marvin, and he said, anytime you want to meet, I'm willing to meet. And so I met with Marvin for about another 8 to 10 times before he died. And he was the one that got my head literally squared on straight, that these people that you are going to deal with are some of the worst people you will ever meet in your life. They're petty. They're small. They fight with each other.
Oh, right. Yeah.
They care more about control. And he taught me that at the end of the day, while money is always important to them, control is more important than money. And he said, if you are up for it, wage war. So I went.
if money was the only thing that motivated them, they wouldn't buy an NFL team. It's actually not the best investment. It's a good, nothing wrong with it. But, Bill Simmons likes to say this. He says, these rich guys, they buy teams so people know who their name is.
It's a toy.
Yeah. It's sort of like, who would Robert Kraft be if he didn't own the Patriots? Just some rich guy that you don't know the name of some company, or Arthur Blank. If you study the founding of Home Depot, maybe you'd know the name. But if you own, who the hell's Jerry Jones, right? Do you know any other oil and gas guys?
100%.
Right. And, but once you buy a team, you become famous.
And the flip side of it is they love the fact that it's a country club that even the richest person in the world can't get into.
There's only 31, right?
There's only
31 trophies you can buy. There's only 31 entries. Maybe someday they'll expand another 2, but the membership committee hasn't. Yeah. You have to be asked, right? Yeah.
You have to be asked. And literally these aren't, it's not simply I have a ton of money, I can afford a team. And to your point, until recently that they decided to change the model in order to allow private equity to come in.
Well, because human beings can't afford this on their own these days. But anyway.
And these teams don't sell, right? I mean, an NFL team or a professional team franchise only comes up for sale, every 10 years, every 8, So for them, here they are. They are now in the country club. They own this large, mega, multi-billion-dollar company that none of them want to sell because the day that they do, no one cares who they are.
Right.
So the way that they can now incrementally make gobs of money, even more gobs of money, because we both know no amount of money is enough, is to bring in private equity so that they can get 3 or 4 iterations of sales without ever having to sell the corpus.
Right. They're trying to pull the equity out of it so they make money without
100%.
ever having to sell it. Yeah. No,
100%.
It's obvious. Let me ask this. Remember Mark Cuban saying this when he first got into the NBA, that there was some generational differences. Younger owners were a little bit different than the older owners. There aren't a lot of the only time you get young owners in the NFL is when the old owner dies and you get a son or a daughter. And yet that does seem to at least can improve things slightly. But put the owners in some various groups for me. Who are the most pragmatic, realistic owners to deal with?
I mean, from a pragmatism standpoint, by far, Robert Kraft. Robert is a very, very tough guy to negotiate with.
Politically savvy. He figures out you're going to hit him for this. Well, then suddenly he does something over here and you're like, he's very savvy about his own public image.
I learned as much from Robert. The only other person I learned more from was Tom Bucks.
Wow.
Robert.
You put Kraft in and how's your personal relationship? Is it pretty good?
It's okay. I mean, now and then.
It's only so much, right? You guys are adversaries.
So much. And look, I think that he and I definitely developed a special relationship during my time at the NFLPA. There were things that, frankly, he did that I'm sure he would chalk up to business. That made.
By the way, you and him were on the same side during Deflategate. So in a weird way, did that help your relationship?
We were. Well, we were up until the end. Yeah. And we weren't on opposite sides. But, for the people listening at home, Kraft had originally decided that he was going to sue the league over their ham-fisted management of Deflategate. But at the end of the day, Robert dropped that lawsuit. And so, I guess there were things certainly that he did, and he would chalk it up to its business. Mm-hmm. And that was one of them. And did it upset me? Yes. Did it ruin our friendship? No. I'm sure there's some things that I've done that I chalked up to business, and he would consider that to be something that was an affront to him. It wasn't meant that way. But no one taught me that this was such a complicated, and he had a line that I never forgot. D, this is not a straight line business. Mm-hmm. And so this idea that somehow you're going to walk in and you're going to say, okay, there's money here, money here, money here, interest here, interest here, interest here, and there's a straight line that runs between all of them. In the National Football League, it does not. I mean, that tension between Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft is a real tension.
Right.
You asked about the categories, the tension between what, at least a while ago, we would consider to be younger owners. And back then, Dan Snyder at one time was a younger owner. Believe it or not, Jerry Jones at one time was a younger owner.
I guess David Tepper would be the young owner today. Is that
he would? And there is a tension between those owners and what we would call the generational Rooneys, Maras, Hunts of the world. Look, I remember vividly during the ramp up to the lockout, I went down to see Jerry, who is tough to say the least. I think Jerry is brilliant. He'll be the first person to tell you that as well. But he's really smart. He knows how to generate revenue. As players, representing the players, we loved that. He has one other redeeming quality. He is funny. He's hysterical. He does make me laugh.
He's charming.
Sometimes I don't understand the jokes, but I love it. But the one thing that I will tell you that created tension very early in his sort of ascension as a powerful leader, he hated the fact that there were so many owners who he believed were quote unquote freeloaders.
You put him in there in the book, and he's right. Like Mike Brown. Right. I mean, and the Davises, they've always been, or look at Alex Spanos,
Ralph Wilson.
I get exactly, and this is a problem baseball has. They've just some terrible owners, that don't know what they're doing.
It was such a point of contention for Jerry that literally before we were locked out, I authorized a grievance to be filed against the other owners because many of the owners had not adhered to the supplemental revenue sharing provision under their own contract. So let's put this in perspective. I used our money to sue owners who weren't sharing money with other owners. Now, people would say that's crazy, but Tom Boggs would tell you that's smart.
Yeah. No, you're trying to divide and conquer. Remind
100%.
them. Look, I always said I knew Schneider was finally cooked when somebody noted he was withholding visiting ticket revenue from the other owners. I'm like, whoa. That's the muerta. That's the first rule of Fight Club. Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Do not, and that was like literally that report leaks and Schneider's gone in like a month.
Well, I mean, and if you remember after the cheerleader stuff, after all
that didn't get it going. Right. None of that other stuff. Taking money away from Jerry Jones and those guys.
Here we go. Third rail. And look, this is a group of people that the best description or the way that I finally got my head around thinking about it was it is a feudal kingdom, a complete feudal kingdom. And Prince Valiant is Roger. His job is to try to keep them together, to certainly ride out and fight their battles. But these are feudal lords who treat their teams as city-states.
I was thinking about Roger versus Rozelle.
Yeah.
And I think that one disadvantage Roger has that the advantage Rozelle had is Rozelle made the owners rich. The owners made Roger rich. And meaning like, the structure was already in place. Rozelle was able to create, see a vision and say, hey guys, working this together, we're going to become so much bigger. So it allowed him to have the real influence. And I do think when you negotiated with Rozelle, he would then force the owners to accept the agreement. I feel like he was not as controlled by the owners. Fast forward to today. I mean, this is and Roger fascinates me because I see the son of a senator who confronted power. Yeah. And I see a guy who sort of doesn't confront power. Right. I find it interesting. But then again, what's the lesson 15-year-old Roger Goodell saw? He saw that his father stood up to the man and the man defeated him. And I've always wondered what impact did that have on him. But in either direction, is Roger simply weaker because the owners have more leverage over him than, say, Rozelle, who truly probably had more leverage over the owners?
Yeah, I think all three were different. I think Tagliabue was in the middle between Rozelle and Roger.
Mm-hmm.
Talk
about a gentleman. I've met with him a few times, and he's such a gentleman.
Always a gentleman to me. Mm-hmm. Always a gentleman. Now, that said, the guy who was behind the quarterbacks club of paying players to pull them out of the union.
Yeah.
Just business. But
just business.
I guess, and I talk about it in Turf Wars because at a time when I was trying to figure out, Roger, that history of his dad taking over Bobby Kennedy's seat, and going to the library and reading his father's papers,
confronting Nixon, standing up, against the Vietnam War. I mean, these were bold moves.
Oh, and at a tough time, and the book is around here, somewhere. The only book that he wrote was Political Prisoners in America. I mean, think about that. With the foreword being to my friend Richard Nixon, who ultimately, politically cuts his throat. Right. I think Roger, I wanted to write a book. Obviously that was fair. I think at the end of the day, Roger ended up better in the book than I ever thought he would. I think that he has a very tough job. But I think that there was this, lack of a better word, I think that there was this arc that started with Rozelle, that went through Tagliabue, and ultimately ended up with Roger, where the owners decided that they wanted to control the levers of the league a little bit more than the commissioner. Now, that said, I mean, I would argue that between Rozelle, Tagliabue, I'd argue that that Roger has made them far richer than either of those two, because he is talented when it comes to wringing out television revenue and structuring the game in which, these networks pay more money for the NFL than they make on the commercials that show the game.
Yeah.
And that's a skill. And at the end of the day, I mean, let's be blunt. Would Mike Brown be a multi-billionaire without Roger? No.
Not a chance.
No. Left to his own devices. No. So I look at it this way. At the end of the year, the owners pay Roger about $2.1 million a year to be billionaires. It's not a bad return on your investment.
No,
right?
And he takes all the other. Let me ask this. If there were 32 Green Bay Packers, community-owned franchises, what would the job be like?
I was about to say, if there were 32 Green Bay Packers, those cats are going both ways on the field. I mean, that's going to be okay.
No, if there were 32 ownership structures, because I've always said this. I feel like sports owners, they don't own a thing. They're custodians. The only reason these teams have value is because the fans give them value.
Right.
So it's a weird thing, right? It's not like I'm buying business widget that makes this widget over here and all this stuff. And so the Packers ownership structure, to me, is actually a correct way to do it. The community should own it, and there should be a board and all of those things. If that is how more NFL teams were structured, I think the New Orleans Saints may be headed in that direction, in a strange way that they're done. You told me the Chicago Bears went that route, it wouldn't completely shock me, considering that's a team that's never been sold, right? It's still the same family-owned business.
Right.
It would make a lot of sense to me. What would that look like? And what would the league look like under that? It would be a more powerful commissioner, I would imagine.
I think it would be a more powerful commissioner. I also think it would be, spitballing off the top, I think that it would be a more powerful union, because you would have 32 teams that are structured more like a corporation with a public board and 10Ks and 10Qs and annual reports.
I mean, the only reason you guys know half the stuff you know about the league is because the Green Bay Packers has to report it publicly.
You do, and we extrapolate. And so, look, I think that would be a completely different animal. Do I think it'll ever happen? No.
Right.
I think that these have become such profitable centers that you can, to your point earlier, you have the ability to socialize your cost and privatize your wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know of any other institutions in America where like Lowe's and Home Depot, the two largest hardware stores in the country are allowed to merge. They are allowed to basically eliminate every threat of competition that has ever existed to the NFL has been eliminated brutally.
Right.
Because nobody else has a antitrust exemption. No one else is covered by the Sports Broadcasting Act, right? Which allows those entities to negotiate unitary television deals, which really kind of separates it from baseball as well, right? And then at the up until recently, the NFL head office was a 501c6 nonprofit. So I start off with the book with this rhetorical question: if you and I are different. If the average person was blessed with a business that generated $25 billion a year and you answered to no one, what would you do? And I think these people do it. I think at the end of the day, they create a system where there is no, I think the best example that I can come up with is, I wrote an article for Yale about the Rooney Rule a few years ago because it is basically a joke. On any level, it's a joke. It's the only rule that the National Football League has ever placed upon itself that it doesn't follow.
Right. Yeah, right? They have to follow the Rooney Rule unless they have an exception to the Rooney Rule.
Right. And we all know they break the rule.
Right. Sean Payton. The most recent example, I think, is Sean Payton in Denver, right?
Yeah.
Where the owner already knew they were going to hire. And they were like, 100%. Okay, how do we go around this? How do we get around this?
100%. So you have this organization that answers to no one. And nonetheless, when you look at the Rooney Rule, you can make a prima facie case that there is discrimination going on in the National Football League. Yet you and I know that not one attorney general has ever applied their own anti-discrimination laws against the team that resides in their state. So these are a group of people who have become extremely comfortable with being above the law.
Are they too popular? Because, you and I both know, do I think attorneys general would go after the NBA if there was a rule like this being mismanaged?
Good question.
The answer is yes.
Yes,
if any other sport, like football, right now is politically untouchable because it's so popular.
Well, it's so untouchable and it's so popular that, taxpayers in upstate New York were paying more for an owner's stadium than they were supplying to their local public schools. That's crazy, right?
So the NFL's nonprofit status, right?
Yeah.
And nonprofit
which they gave up, by the way.
So it's completely given up. So does that mean how much revenue were they hiding?
Who knows? Because the reason they gave it up is for years they weren't complying with the LM2s and LM30s that you have to file for a non-public, for a nonprofit organization. So, it could be literally, Chuck, it could have been hundreds of millions of dollars, because if you're pushing money into the league office and paying out expenses, you're just making the teams appear to have spent more, so that their tax burden is lower.
Right.
So, who knows? I think the real reason that they gave up the nonprofit status is I think they really got tired of me going around the country and saying that they were a nonprofit. I think that absolutely just made them lose their minds. But at the same time, what you have to do if you're a nonprofit? You have to publicize the earnings and the salary and the compensation of not only the commissioner, but everybody else who works for the league office.
And they got tired of their income.
Well, I'll give you one more. At least going back to some of the earlier days that preceded me, I think it might have been a grievance that we had filed. I can't quite remember whether it was somebody who told me or we ended up reading about it somewhere, but there were people in the league office who were getting warrants for, I think it was Reebok stock. So things that were connected to the deals that they were doing. So, if you do that, you have to report that as well. And what went out with the nonprofit status was any obligation of anybody in the league office reporting salary or other compensation.
Alternative compensation, like stock options and things like that. So one of the explanations that's always been given over the years as to why the NFL players don't have the guaranteed contracts, and why NFL players have sort of quote unquote folded sooner than the baseball players did, is the lifespan of an NFL player earnings potential is so short that that player that's only going to be making money for can't afford to lose a year of that's a third of their for some of them that's a third of their professional career suddenly out the window. And it's to me been one of the explanations. And is that the reason? I mean, is it that just each team is too big? What's your sense?
I think the reason is, I think looking back now, I think psychologically, I don't know of another sport that is psychologically more militaristic than the National Football League. I
think it's almost like it's your duty to accept the premise, come on, private grunt, offensive lineman grunt.
It's just I find it different. So I'm not saying that's the only reason. It's a collection of reasons, but it's a less
individualistic sport.
100%.
That's for sure. Right. Both baseball and it's why I love football. I think it teaches teamwork. I think it's such an essential tool for teenagers to learn that, hey, it takes 11 people rowing in the same direction to succeed at something.
100%. And look, that's why I love football. I think that it's that. I think it's the sort of quasi-militaristic spirit about it. I think that I think history has a lot to do with it. You had failed strikes in the 80s and in the early 90s. And look, my job is to try to build a level of solidarity and willingness to be a martyr. And if I couldn't do that, that's a failure on my part. So I think it's a combination of things that makes it tough. But, the thing that I loved during my time there, I can think of 2 times when the players came together. And first was, as you remember, when the president gave that speech in Huntsville, Alabama, that I'm sure he didn't understand it, that he basically called every NFL player's mother a B. And in a football culture, the other place that you love that locker room mentality is you can say a lot of things, but you go down the mother is a B word and everybody is about to get hands laid on them. That's just my culture, and that's their culture.
Well, that's the same military culture, but the other way. Like, whoa, my band of brothers. Oh, no. Right.
And that entire weekend, including that Monday night, when the Dallas Cowboys and Jerry Jones knelt, that was a show of solidarity.
That was Jerry Jones taking the temperature of his own locker room.
1,000% of either being on the train or in front of the train.
That's right.
And,
no.
And he chose on the train. And again, I give a great deal of credit to the guys in his locker room, because he had said if anybody kneels, they're going to get cut. But those guys stood up. I mean, look, I think that what goes on in the National Football League is a metaphor, paradigm shift story about what American workers have to do in order to make sure that they protect themselves. And I get it. I get the idea that it's only 1/3 of, you might be risking 1/3 of your career. But look, I mean, my dad, my mother decided to risk a lot more when they were marching for voting rights. Going back to the coal miners of yore, Mother Jones and Rich Trumka, they all risked things. I probably went on 150 pickets while I was executive director. The last of which I went on a picket line in Los Angeles for a group of women who were making ice cream cakes for Cold Stone.
Mm.
And those women had been on strike for more than a year, mostly earning a little bit more than minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
And, if I'm standing up in front of our guys and I'm begging them or asking them or threatening them at sometimes to stand up for themselves, I don't have much more in me than saying, man, there's a group of women living paycheck to paycheck, willing to go to war.
Let me get you out of here on this. And that is what's going on in college.
Yeah.
Because college players right now, in this moment in time, have more leverage than NFL players. They have more freedom of movement.
Yeah.
Arguably.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They can, if you're, take Brock Purdy.
Yeah.
Brock Purdy has this career year. In college, he could take that, go to the University of Miami and triple his salary that he was making at, say, at Iowa State.
Right.
But in the NFL, with the rookie contract, he couldn't do that. Right. He was sort of stuck within the prism. And, you hope you sort of the agent plays the game. Do you really want to make this, whatever. But the point is, we are now going to have a new class of players that are coming into the league who have actually had more negotiating rights for their financial future.
Yeah.
Starting in high school.
Yeah.
Than the NFL players have today. I know that's going to change the complexion of the NFLPA. 100%. And I assume it's going to create, I think, if I'm the NFL owners, I have to figure out how to get in front of this, because I think it's going to be an entirely different relationship between players and owners 5 years from now, as you get this, essentially, as the old players cycle out and this new players cycle in.
I agree.
What do you think? Look, I think you and I both assume collective bargaining's coming to college sports. Kind of has to. I don't know how you, how you divvy up the TV money and all that stuff.
Yeah, or a version of it, right?
Or some form of it.
Yeah.
But that player empowerment happening now for high schoolers, okay?
Yeah.
Negotiating their way to decide which school to be at, right? They have more freedom than Reggie White ever had. They have more freedom than any Patrick Mahomes has today in the NFL. That's got to change the mindset of this union.
I would hope. I guess the one thing I would say, Chuck, is what you've described is college and high school players having more freedom.
Mm-hmm.
It takes direction and guidance to turn that into empowerment. And what I worry about is, on one hand, you are absolutely right. High school players and college players have more freedom over their individual year-to-year contract than a drafted rookie player in his first 3 years. That's just the way it is. By the way, if the NFL players want to decide in 2030 to get rid of the draft, man, let's go. Right? Go. But
Cincinnati Bengals would never have another good player again. But anyway, I digress.
But the draft has always been there from the player side.
Yeah.
The draft has always been there because it was there to protect players coming out of college when they didn't have anything.
Yeah.
I think that's going to change.
Yeah.
But the question is, while they have this level of freedom, who on the high school side and who on the college side directs that freedom in a direction or with a focus so that it manifests itself into empowerment? And I think you are dead right about one thing. The NFL owners fear this more than anything. And the last thing they want is for an educated, empowered player to start coming in and demanding things.
Look, these high school kids are now learning about all of this in a way that 10 years ago they didn't bother, because there was nothing there to learn yet. In fairness, like they knew about the recruiting process, and they might know, hey, if I do this, I'll get Nike gear, and if I do this, I'll get Adidas gear. But it was not financial, and this is where I do think, like you just said, you're just going to have, there was an old clothing store called Sims And they used to have this tagline, right?
Sims.
The educated consumer is our best customer. Right.
On,
it was such a great tagline, right? The educated consumer is our best. Yeah, we're two old guys.
We're both local guys. We get Sims.
Sims, right.
I went to Sims.
Yeah. So this is going to be a more educated player. And it is a nightmare, I think, for the future NFL.
I think it's a more educated player, going back to if there is focus and direction. Because what I do fear a little bit is, when I would travel around to college campuses, we actually had a program called Pipeline to the Pros or Pipeline to the Pros. And NFLPA people would go to college campuses and talk to players about what it means to
little financial education, wasn't it? It was basically, right?
Yeah,
a little bit of that. Yeah.
But Chuck, it was only a day. Right. What I would love to see is, in the way that these schools are now providing, hundreds of millions of dollars to these athletes. If I could wave a magic wand, I would love for many of the firms that I brought in to be on our financial literacy, whether it was Morgan Stanley or other companies coming in to become financial advisors to players.
Yeah.
I would love a world where, if these schools are going to do this and be a part of the financial enrichment for the players, man, I would love a world where either there was mandatory attendance at these financial literacy seminars, or guys and women being mandated to take classes in college for that.
I guess it's weird that I haven't asked you about the current mess at the NFLPA right now. I know you're not there, but what has that done to morale? Yeah. Are there, who is, I was pals with Eric Winston, who was your sort of player side.
Yeah.
He was the president of the players when he was a working player. How concerned are players, you think, right now, of this mess among your successors?
I hope they're concerned.
Okay.
I hope they have an understanding of how important this union is, as literally the only barrier between you and the National Football League. I hope that players will take the time to how do I say this delicately? I hope that they take a time, and especially the player leadership, to spend some time in sort of brutal reflection of how they got here.
Meaning vet these guys better?
Man, well, I don't want I think
I know you're in a tough position. I'm not trying to. This is not Meet the Press today.
Yeah. What I would say is this. Man, I knew when I sat in front of the players in 2009 that Breeze, Mawai, Dawkins, Saturday, the lawyers that were in the room, the former players that were in the room, I knew the moment I sat down that everybody in there understood two things. They understood the history, and they understood that the owners are not 31 guys who are somehow going to be sweet talked by someone who talks the language of business. And I think they understood that better than anyone. And if the players want to make sure that they are well prepared for the war that is coming their way, it is. If I were the owners of the National Football League, and I unfortunately know the way that they think, you and I both know that there isn't a major corporation in the country that's still paying a pension. Right? I mean, the NFL is. I think that the owners understand that the salary cap and revenue, if it's going to be tied to this share of revenue, you're going to be looking at a salary cap that is going to be astronomical.
They don't want to pay the NBA contracts, do they? They're petrified of paying the $90 million a year contract.
No. Yeah. And so you will either interpret that as a existential threat to the way that you have done business as a player, or you'll stick your head in the sand and not think that way. So, I loved my time there for the most part. But this union is so critically important to the men and the families who play this game that the leadership better have their own Marvin Miller that gets their heads on straight.
Yeah, maybe in some ways this scandal's a wake-up call, right? It's sort
Hopefully,
of they were able to, in some ways, you deal with a problem before it could have been worse.
You hope so, and you hope you learn from it, right?
Yeah, I could keep going, talk about
pleasure.
how do we, but like I said, this book, again, you want to understand the business of football. You don't have to agree with everything DeMaurice wrote in here, but it really does. It's just a very opaque league. Extraordinarily opaque, and anytime you can peer inside, and you helped us peer inside, so it was a great read. Congrats.
Appreciate it.
All right, brother.